Yes, good morning to all, and may I welcome the officials from the Ministry of Finance, Investments Division, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, and the Cocoa Development Company Limited of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as members of the media and members of the public. Good morning once again. My name is Wade Mark. I'm the chairman of this committee. May I say from the outset that the Committee of Public on the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee has a mandate to consider and report to the House on the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of all enterprises that are owned or controlled by or on behalf of the state. It is also responsible to receive the Auditor General's report on any such accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements, and to determine whether policy is being carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. The purpose of our meeting is to examine the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of the Cocoa Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago for the period 2014 to 2016. This committee is desirous of hearing the challenges being faced by the key stakeholders of this very important company in an attempt to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges. The role of the committee is to help the Cocoa Development Company improve its delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. May I advise that this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's topic via email parl101@ttparliament.org, facebook.com/ttparliament, Twitter @ttparliament. At this time, I will ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting on my immediate right. Thereafter, I will ask the officials of the Investments Division, Ministry of Finance, to follow and to be followed by the Ministry of Agriculture, and finally, the Cocoa Development Board. So I'll ask my colleague on my far right to begin introductions.
Good morning. Foster Cummings, member.
Good morning. Tim Gopi Singh, member.
Mr. Hines, could you just press and
Put back again.
Chair. Good morning, Fitzgerald Haynes, member.
Good morning. Tim Gopi Singh, member.
Good morning, Sherian Kuchlukuban, member.
Good morning, Jennifer Lutchman, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Investments Division.
Good morning, Ryan Maharaj, Senior Business Analyst, Acting Investments Division, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Sally Ramisa, Business Analyst, Investment Division, Ministry of Finance.
Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning, Lydia Jacobs, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good morning, Albada Beacom, Acting Director of Research, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good morning. My name is Jaiwanti Samsundar. I'm an Agricultural Officer 1, attached to Research Division, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good morning. Chris Ramkisoon, Planning Officer, Agricultural Planning Division, Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning. David Ram, Acting Deputy Director of Regional Administration North, Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning, Teresa Roseman, Technical Officer Crops, Research Division.
Good morning, Winston Rudder, Chair of the Cocoa Development Company.
Good morning, Jacqueline Rollins, Director, Cocoa Development Company.
Good morning, Leon Granger, Chief Executive Officer, Cocoa Development Company.
Good morning, Mala Partap, Chief Operations Officer and Secretary at Cocoa Development Company.
May I at this time invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries has been working in a collaborative manner with the Cocoa Development Company to provide technical, training, research, and logistical support to cocoa farmers with a view to impacting in a positive manner the cocoa industry. The Ministry has partnered with both local and foreign entities in our attempt to improve quality along the value chain. We therefore welcome the opportunity, along with the entire team, to clarify any issues which the committee may wish to raise this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I now invite the chairman of the Cocoa Development Company to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chair and members. The Cocoa Development Company is very privileged to be before the committee this morning, and we look forward to the advice that we will get as a result of the examination of our financial records. For purposes of your deliberations, I wanted to emphasize the fact that the Cocoa Development Company, though incorporated as a state entity, is essentially a development organization, and it is not a commercial entity. It derives its impetus from the fact of the critical and important role that cocoa could play and does play as a strategic commodity in the agricultural sector, with a potential to contribute to agricultural development, economic diversification, foreign exchange earnings, and improve livelihoods and well-being. But the company and the cocoa industry of Trinidad and Tobago operates in a global framework, and I just want to make 2 or 3 references that are relevant. The world cocoa production currently is between 4.5 and 4.9 million metric tons. And the cocoa market, the global cocoa market, is essentially distinguished between high quality, fine or flavor cocoa, which is about 5% of global production, and bulk or ordinary cocoa beans. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the 10 countries in the world currently recognized by the International Cocoa Organization as a 100% producer of fine or flavor cocoa beans. And the market for this is relatively small, highly specialized, separate, extremely lucrative, and in fact, growing. One of the key characteristics of the difference is in respect of the prices paid for raw cocoa beans. Raw cocoa beans for the fine or flavor market today fetches between $3,500 and $10,000 US per metric ton, whereas bulk cocoa, as of yesterday, for example, only fetches at a high of $2,200 US per ton, and very often less. One of the reasons for this is, of course, the high quality end products that the finer flavor cocoa enters. Over the past 4 years that the Cocoa Development Company has been in operation, we have been part and parcel of a mechanism flowing from the development of a national strategic plan for the cocoa industry that took place and was delivered by a committee commissioned by the minister in around May 2017. This formed the basis for the Cocoa Development Company preparing its own strategic plan, which the strategic objectives underline which direct our operations. I want to point out, sir, that in the course of implementing the activities of the plan based on these strategic objectives, there are many challenges which I'm sure you would wish to question us on. But I want to also emphasize that notwithstanding these challenges, the CDCTTL, which is the Cocoa Development Company, has been able to provide direct assistance to cocoa farmers, entrepreneurs along the cocoa value chain, and in specific communities. We were able to develop, working together with our partners, including the Ministry of Agriculture, as mentioned by the Permanent Secretary, to staunch the decline in the cocoa production, domestic cocoa production, and we could speak to that later. We have also been able to restore some confidence in the cocoa industry. That was absolutely necessary because the change from the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board, a statutory organization, to a state enterprise which operated quite differently and which was not purchasing farmers' cocoa. The whole industry will liberalize. That caused a little bit of dissonance, and we've had to manage that. We have also been able to build a very robust network across the stakeholder divide, not only focusing on farmers, but all the important critical elements along the value chain, including the growing domestic chocolatiers, chocolate manufacturing, and value-added industry. We have been also able to develop and strengthen strategic alliances with institutional partners, partners whom in normal circumstances one would have hardly considered to be part and parcel of the development of the cocoa industry. I'm talking about the Ministry of Health in respect of food safety, health, and what have you. The Ministry of Finance, not only in terms of funding, but in the customs, export, TT, and what have you. So that aspect of it has been considerably strengthened, and of course the Cocoa Research Center at the University of the West Indies. We have also been able, and this is a pride and joy that we share as we appear before you today, to clean up the accounts of the organization, which when we met, the documents were in drawers, in files. We had to clean that up to be able to present audited financial statements for the period which you are covering, sir. And we have also been able to bring it up to 2016, 2017, publicly published yesterday. All of that has contributed to stimulate increased interest in the industry, a matter that we can speak to later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can begin by asking you to give us a brief overview. I mean, I know that you touched on aspects of it, but for the listening public, can you sketch a brief overview on the state of play of this industry? So where it was, as far as you recall, where it came from, that is, where is the industry now, and where you intend to take it. So if you could give us that, in a tight overview, I think this committee and the public would appreciate. So we put that in your hands to give us that tight survey.
I will attempt. There was a time, many, many years ago, when we were a producer of cocoa beans to the extent of 35,000 metric tons in the 1920s. We are now producing today barely 500 metric tons. When when the Cocoa Development Company came into being, we were around 300 metric tons. That's the state of play with respect to the actual production of beans. That notwithstanding, there has been an embryonic, and we were focusing as a cocoa producing country largely on the production of beans for export, high quality beans for export. The quality was always of the finer flavor type, but the volumes have gone down significantly for all kinds of reasons. We have seen, prior to even the board coming on stream, the development of a nascent embryonic domestic value-added industry, local chocolatiers, who are in fact taking this high-quality cocoa bean and producing excellent, high-quality chocolate that resonates in the markets and the mouths of people who tasted it. The critical examination and assessment that took place when we were looking at the strategic thrust for the industry suggests that based on the research and development work already done in terms of domestic production, based on the availability of markets, based on work that has been done in the Cocoa Research Center at St. Augustine, there is scope and opportunity, and in fact, it's a vision that has informed how the partners in the industry are working, to take this industry to a point where we can develop a significant domestic value-added industry, expanding into providing more employment opportunities and economic activity by doing a lot more production of value-added in Trinidad and Tobago. At the same time, exporting high-quality beans into selected niche markets. For example, we know, for example, on the basis of the evidence that we have collected, because just to make one small point, Trinidad and Tobago has had, together with all the other countries in the world that produce fine or flavored cocoa, to produce evidence to the International Cocoa Organization, and we're in the final processes of that, to retain our status. And importantly, we must make the point, because fine or flavor status and high quality is not a birthright that we have. Other countries also enjoy, and we are finding that 10 additional countries are also seeking to qualify for that market. If we continue with the low volumes that we are producing now, and if we do not continue to maintain high quality production, we stand to work ourselves out of the chocolate formulations and recipes, notwithstanding we produce high quality. So the challenge that we confront as a people, as an industry, is to ramp up production and productivity, and at the same time, keep your quality standards high. And this is really what is informing what we do in the Cocoa Development Company, but not only what we do, in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Cocoa Research Unit, and the stakeholder community out there. There are some challenges, undoubtedly, that we have to face, and possibly one of them is the level of investment that we need to put into the industry. But the question, there's no question in our mind that based on the data that we have, and based on the technical prowess that exists in the country, and based on the collaborative work that can be further entrenched amongst the institutions, we have a possibility of targeting, of being able to and we have put our target at 12,000 metric tons over the next 10 or so years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You did mention in your opening statement that the audited financial statement for 2017 had been completed and forwarded to, is it the Ministry of Finance or Finance and the Parliament?
It has been completed. I know that we have published it publicly in the newspapers yesterday, as indicated. I am not sure whether we have forwarded it to Finance. It's been done. It's in process, on the road to Finance.
All right, because we are yet to receive it. So I would urge you to get it to the Ministry of Finance as quickly as you can so we can have access to that report. As I wanted to also ask, how many cocoa farmers, Mr. Chairman? Yes? Yes?
I was just wondering, you said the accounts were published, but it hasn't reached Ministry of Finances yet. Is that the correct procedure?
After the accounts are published, normally we would send a copy of the gazetted information to the Ministry of Finance. However, a soft copy of the signed account has been forwarded.
Mr. Chairman, just to Ministry of Finance, is that the correct procedure?
Chairman, if I may, the publishing of the accounts, the audited accounts, have to be subsequent to the annual general meeting, and after that, then we'll send it to the Parliament. So the AGM must be held first, and then the accounts published.
The question has been asked. The accounts have to be published, but is it to be published in the Gazette, in the newspapers, where? When is it published? Where?
For state enterprises, in the newspapers.
In the newspapers. Yeah. So after you publish it, you would have your annual general meeting, as you said. Could you advise this committee whether the annual general meeting has been held thus far?
Chairman, if I may again, the AGM have to be held first, and then the accounts are published.
So has the AGM been held?
Not in respect of the particular year.
So how can we are dealing with the 2017 accounts, am I correct?
No.
No, I'm saying
the reference was made to the 2017 accounts.
What we have before us is 2014 to 2016, Mr. Chairman. What you have advised in your opening statement is that the 2017 has been published. That is what I gained from what you had said.
And clearly that was an error made on the part of the Cocoa Development Company.
So the Cocoa Company has proceeded to publish its accounts without the holding in accordance with well-established procedures, the annual general meeting. Is it that what I'm getting from you, Mr. Chairman, and therefore the company, that is the Cocoa Company, may have committed an error by publishing without holding their annual general meeting?
Clearly so, sir.
But could you share with this committee what could have prompted or generated the Cocoa Company to do such, having regard to the well-established practice?
I can only say it probably was an excess of enthusiasm.
An excess of enthusiasm. Could you tell this committee whether this is the first time? Because we are now dealing, as you are aware, with the 2014. So 2014, 2015, 2016. Could you share with this committee, as far as you are aware, whether the cocoa company suffered from this same enthusiastic development or excitement as it relates to the publishing of the financial audited accounts?
No, sir, because those are the only, that is the life of the company. The period for which you covered, which is currently being covered, marked the beginning of the life of the cocoa development company.
Oh, so the 17 was really the beginning of your life?
The period 14, 15, 16 marked the first 3 years of the company.
Yeah, well, that's what I understand. That is why I'm asking you, having regard to the first 3 years, where you appear, and I'm saying appear because I don't have the evidence, that everything was done in accordance with well-established procedure, meaning that before you publish, you would have held your annual general meeting. However, for the current period that we are analyzing, 2017, it appears that something went wrong, and you published those accounts prior to the holding of your annual general meeting. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And you claim that it could have been as a result of an over-enthusiasm or enthusiastic approach by the board in getting those accounts out.
That I would say so, sir.
Is there a sanction for this kind of overexcitement that you referred to? Can I ask the members of the Ministry of Finance, when something like this happens, what would you do to ensure it is not repeated in the future?
Chair, yesterday, we also saw the financial statements published in the papers, and we knew that the AGM was not held as yet. But this has been the first time that we have encountered something like that. But as far as I know, there is no sanction for that.
May I ask the Permanent Secretary if you were like the officials out of the Ministry of Finance Investments Division, were you like them surprised, and were you like them seeing and reading for the first time? Or did you sanction this decision to have these reports published, that is the audited financial report, published, knowing full well that it must have an AGM prior to those reports being published? Could you share with us?
Chair, we are in the same position as the Ministry of Finance.
Were these audited statements, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, they were.
This is a pretty unusual development. And so, Madam Permanent Secretary, in those circumstances, given your overall supervision or supervisory role as it relates to this company, how would you suggest that this matter be addressed?
Well, Chair, we were not in possession of 2017 as yet. We would have had up to 2016, all the financial statements. So I guess we just have to work, with the Cocoa Development Company to reinforce the procedures that are required in dealing with the financials.
May I ask Investments Division, when something like this happens and you are surprised by what occurred, what steps would be taken by the investments division to ensure that this development does not take place again in the future or happens in the future? Would you formally pen a letter to the board indicating its breach of the rules or the procedures? What would you do, seeing that, as you said, it's the first time it's occurring?
Chair, what we would do is, as you said, write the chairman of the board, and of course the Minister of Finance would write the chairman of the board advising that this is not what was supposed to have been done, and also advising the correct procedure that must be followed. And we would ask that they submit their audited financial statements and consult with the company to decide on a date for their AGM that is suitable for both the investments division, well, Corporation Seoul, of course, we represent, and the company, and hopefully, as soon as possible, have that AGM where the financial statements will be presented.
Mr. Chairman of the Cocoa Company, seeing that in 2014, 2015, 2016, everything was done, as you would say, above board, and everything was done in accordance with the rules. Could you indicate whether this was done with the full concurrence of your board, or whether it was done by some enthusiastic member without your knowledge or the board's knowledge? How did this occur? Because I'm asking this against the background of what would have occurred in 2014, everything done properly, 2015, done properly, 2016, done properly. But in 2017, something went adrift. What could have been responsible for that? Is the entire board taking collective responsibility for this particular misstep, I would like to call it, that has taken place? Or how would you describe who was responsible? The entire board and the management? Or was it, for instance, done in a collaborative effort? Could you share with this committee?
As chairman of the board, and the board operates under my general guidance and direction, they would have been persuaded that this is the correct thing. So I have to accept the responsibility myself.
Okay. All right. May I, at this point in time, deal with another matter? I realize, and you made a point earlier, Mr. Chairman, that this company has a lot of potential in getting not only diversification going, but economic growth, development, earning of foreign exchange, generation of employment, among other objectives. However, to do so, you need to have a well-resourced organization or company. But I observe that there's no accountant, there's no market research officers, there's no marketing assistant, there's no production assistant within the arrangement of this very important organization. But most importantly, Mr. Chairman, there's no internal audit function in that organization, meaning the robust internal controls that are required to ensure public monies are properly spent and there are controls in place to ensure that there's no waste, there's no inefficiency, there's no opportunity for any adventures. It requires an internal audit function, regardless of the size of the organization. Could you explain to this company, first of all, this committee rather, why there is no internal auditor in that organization? And what steps are being taken to address this lacuna in the system, and explain to us why these vacancies continue. Accountant, market research officers, marketing assistant, production assistant. Could you share with this committee why these things are happening?
Yes, Chair. The staff build-up in the Cocoa Development Company has been deliberately retarded consonant with the indications of what the financial resources seemingly would be made available to it. Because most of the staff, all of the staff of the company are people on contract, 3-year contracts. And we have to be, as we bring people on contract, we have to make arrangements in the event of termination benefits. With the financial flows to the company, in the quantum that they are, backstopped by funds that had been inherited from the previous board, we had to make a prudent judgment about the staff buildup. And in the event, we have had deliberately to decide that certain key positions had to be filled, others we will have to go by. And this accounts for the staff vacancies. The board did and have been agonizing about the internal audit function because we recognize the importance of that for the reasons that you have explained so very clearly. And as a measure, what we have, in fact, only quite recently decided is to outsource that particular function to at least have some confidence in the arrangements such as we have been engaged in. On reflection, and still agonizing, we know that that is not the most efficient and most effective way of dealing with it. But in the final analysis, it's a juggling of the staffing arrangements consistent with the resource availabilities. And this is the approach that we have taken.
Yes, sure. Mrs. Coburn.
Mr. Chairman, I have a concern. The staff in an organization is supposed to support the strategic plan. So in this juggling that you are speaking about, how did you determine which positions to leave vacant? And how does that impact in your strategic plan and your whole work program for the organization?
Well, in a nutshell, the whole work program and the vision remains the same, the goal remains the same, the rate at which you can do anything is retarded. That's the truth.
I need to be clear, I need to understand. So are you indicating that the board has implemented a structure and work programs that they know retard the progress of the organization? Is that what is being said?
What I'm saying is that the board developed a strategic plan consistent with the objectives and strategies of the National Development Plan. In looking at how this proposal would be effected, it had to look at the an appropriate organizational structure that would give effect to that. In looking at the finances that were at the disposal of the board had to make a judgment on which positions within the organizational structure could best be filled and await further determinations on financial flows in order to fill the other positions.
Mr. Chairman, I want to raise two areas. One, we would have dealt with the internal audit, but the COCO board is being run as an organization, one, without an audit function, and also without a risk assessment policy or function. Now, in your submission, you would have identified areas that you consider the probability of risk to be high and low. Under high, you have pest disease, which could result in a loss of 25% of the current output. Advancing age of farmers, that's going to impact 25% of lands. Climate change, which is loss of your current output. Labor skills, another area that is high. These are critical areas to the functioning of the cocoa industry. If you do not have functions that have oversight of these areas, how is the Cocoa Development Board contributing to the development of this cocoa industry in Trinidad and Tobago? That is my area of concern.
The Cocoa Development Board is not contributing, the Cocoa Development Company is not contributing in the full measure in which it could for the precise reasons that you have indicated. For example, the CEO has only been on board 1 year. The COO has only been on board of 1 month. So the whole question of staffing is critical to the elaboration of an effective delivery on the areas that are indicated both within the strategic plan and as part of its operational activities.
Has the company sat down, looked at what its mandate is, what the strategic plan, its major goals are, what the objectives are, what it is intended to achieve, and identified the structure that is needed to support all of that, and made a proposal to its, to the line ministry?
This company has sat down and done all of that and has developed a 3-year operational plan that indicates what were the staffing requirements and what have you.
Can you, Mr. Chairman, could you provide us a copy of that plan that you...
A 3-year operational plan?
Yes.
Yes.
To this committee. And then I have a few questions about Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, and then Mr. Hines, and then I think Mr. Foster and I will come back. So Dr. Tim Gopi Singh.
The Chairman, good morning to you and to your teams and all the teams. Your subvention for 2014-2015 from your report has been 9.947 million. 2015-2016, 1.89, 2016, 1.83, and 2017, 1.83, and 2018, 2.8. Of course, we understand that this is your subvention, but why did you seek to just fill your team with 4 personnel, CEO, COO, manager, and that utilizes about 1.4 million of your subvention of 2.8. Of course, you will need additional staff to help you go around based on your strategic plan that you have set about. So when you are top-heavy there and you have no one to do the work outside there and to help you meet the farmers, help them to develop their crops and so on. So you are a board, obviously, sitting there top-heavy and not having the necessary human resource capacity and capability to help you do the job that you're really supposed to be doing, which is the improvement of the industry. What are your thoughts on that when you occupy, 4 people occupying 1.4 million of your 2.0 or 2.1 subvention? Where the other, how you deal with that?
Through you, Chair, may I respond? The first 2 years of the company, this board operated as an operational board. To bring in people at the operational level and not have a minimum management structure with the capacity and competence to direct what is being done in the field is to suggest, with respect, that the board assumes that responsibility. And I really, the board couldn't continue to do that and then have oversight responsibility for operations. The people who have been brought in at that are, in fact, you know, if I have to indicate what happened, we collapsed 4 distinct functions into one function as a cost-saving measure to cover a whole range, a gamut of activities, including corporate secretary, so that we acted prudently in the circumstances, because these were the minds that would have had to develop and oversee the operational activities.
So you have ceased operational aspects of your company. So could you tell us now what is your core function in terms of the industry, which I'm sure your minister will want you to expand, and the Ministry of Agriculture will want you to expand, and hence the reason why the board was formed, and the old cocoa and coffee board have been extinguished, but you are now the forerunner for it, for the development of the industry, for sustainable development, etc. So you have removed the operational aspect. So therefore, what is your core function now?
Again, through you, Chair, with respect. No, sir, we have not removed the operational function. Fortuitously, when this board came, was put in charge, we inherited a bank account that was left by the previous board, and we have been prudently managing that to bring on board operational staff. So we do, that is why the current structure would, the current staffing would indicate, for example, 5 cocoa development officers operating in 18 clusters directly with cocoa farmers, and other personnel in the marketing communication area, and some support staff in the finance administrative area. But it is precisely because we foresee that the rate at which we are drawing down on those funds that we inherited in the bank, that we have been making proposals for financial.
All right. If I'm to get you clearly, Mr. Chairman, well, your response to the committee says that you inherited a balance of over $13 million. Could you give us what is the level of that account now based on, is it your desire to fill these positions, or have they been filled, or are you utilizing the funds from this to fill these positions pretty shortly?
Oh, in fact, sorry, Chair. We have, in fact, been drawing down on these funds that were in the bank. And we do have a bank balance, I'm advised, of 6.9 million currently.
You have utilized about 7 so far from the 13.
Yes.
And what have you utilized it to do? What has been the purpose of the utilization of the funds?
Well, maybe I should ask my
Do you have an accountant, Mr. Chairman? Or?
Well, we have a composite function which includes the
Composite So is this, could you share with us? I understand she, the lady is Mrs. Pratap.
Yes.
Is she your chief operating officer?
She's a chief operating officer, and her portfolio extends from the corporate secretary function, finance, administration, human resource, and what have you.
Okay, that's a very...
So can we hear the answer to it?
Yes. Mrs. Pratap, you can share with us what that $7 million was used for? Mrs. Pratap. Yes, Miss Pratap. Yes.
Chair, with reference to the financial statements of 2014, at the inception of the Cocoa Development Company, the statement of comprehensive income. In that first year of operations, our total expenses amounted to $245,000, comprising audit fees, director fees, professional fees. Audit fees, $24,000, director fees, $117,000 approximately, professional fees, $72,000. For the year ended 30th September 2015, our statement of comprehensive income, our expenses amounted to $2.4 approximately million, largely comprising administrative expenses. I'm going to give a breakdown of those expenses.
I think we don't need the breakdown of it, but just give the larger picture so we can understand. It will take too much of our time.
Okay.
You can submit it to us. Yeah.
So the broad categories of expenditure has been on stakeholder consultations, general office expenses, and a very limited program of work, and salaries and wages.
Which year has been your largest expenditure?
The largest expenditure has been in our fiscal year just ended, 2017-2018.
How much was spent then?
The expenditure was approximately $4.5 million.
And what has been the main thing you said for stakeholder consultations?
In this year, this is when the strategic plan of the Cocoa Development Company has been operationalized. In 2018 fiscal, we brought on board 5 Cocoa Development officers who assumed office in January of 2018. And they have spent the majority, well, all of 2018 actually, implementing our program of work. So along with our normal overheads, such as running the office, paying salaries and wages, so on, we have expended money on implementing the program of work, which includes all of our farmer outreach programs, technical training, implementing various programs such as treatment for pest and disease, etc.
So your 4 developmental officers,
5, sir.
or 5, have been conducting this work on the field.
Yes.
And this is where most of the expense went. And for the future, you said you're also contemplating adding other staff. What is the contemplation in terms of your human resource development for the future?
The organization chart that is appended to the package was one that was developed based in order to achieve the strategic objectives of the organization. As of September 2018, we publicly advertised for those positions to be filled. We have received over 1,000 applications for those 7 vacant positions. Because of our resource constraints, management had to review the situation and identify the critical areas that needed to be filled. My chairman would have explained that in addition to this portfolio of Chief Operations Officer includes oversight of the operational aspect, but also the accounting and the administration, etc. We recognize that there were internal controls concerned, and we took a decision that we needed to bring additional support in the finance and accounting areas to ensure proper segregation of duties.
So if I'm to get you clearly, the 4 of you are the top positions, then you have 5 development officers coming in within the last year, most of which the money was expended through them in their programs, and you have advertised for 7 other positions. Just give me a broad specific area, what those positions are going to do.
Sure. The positions are largely support positions, administrative assistant positions, supporting the finance function, the marketing, business development, and communication function, and production.
Okay, all right. Chair, I crave your indulgence, so just ask a few specific questions to the chairman and then my colleagues. Chairman, how many, you said that the cultivation in the 1920s was around 35,000 from Trinidad. Yes, and now it's about 500 metric tons per year, which is about 1/70th of what we were doing in 1920s. As the board that is entrusted by the minister with the responsibility for the development of this industry, how do you propose, or what have you been doing and what intend to continue to move this process forward? You mentioned it, to a larger production with the Trinidad and Tobago cocoa being of the high standard that it is. How do you intend to take this up from 500 to what you said that you want to move it to X amount? And what are your projections? Tell us, how many farmers are there in Trinidad and Tobago, private farmers?
I can give you the overview, and the specific questions about number of farmers, I'll ask my CEO to give you that figure.
Please.
Again, so, sorry, sir, through you, Chair.
Well, yeah, answer that if you can.
I think the point has to be made that the Cocoa Development Company has a role as driver, catalyst, coordinator, collaborator.
Yeah, that's a wide expression. Everybody
gives broad.
What are your sentiments? How are you going to implement it? What are you going to implement? Tell us the nitty-gritty of it.
I want to answer.
You see, we customer management jargon, and we intend to do this and so on. But
Chairman, through
focus.
I am not here to give jargon.
All
I am
right.
here to indicate to you what is the remit of the Cocoa Development Company, to emphasize that the Cocoa Development Company operates within a framework of collaborative institutions. There is not a hope in the world that the target indicated in the strategic plan for cocoa industry in Trinidad and Tobago will be delivered by what the Cocoa Development Company alone does. And I think that point has to be made extremely clear.
Go on, explain further how
that means to say that if it is established that we want to get to 5,000 metric tons of cocoa in the next couple of years, cocoa plants would have to be developed, and that's a responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture, and therefore it is a collaborative mechanism that exists.
You are in charge, Chairman, of a board appointed by the minister or the state to improve the development of the industry, Cocoa Development Company Limited. So it means it's development of the industry. And you are saying that you are operating within your own constraints, but we would expect you to think outside of the box and begin to enumerate how you see the future to move to your 5,000 tons per year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you give us some ideas of how you...
One of the critical things that the Cocoa Development Company did, and it has continued to do, is to have a collaborative working group, including the CRC and the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. Because in order to target, to make that target, Cocoa Development Company alone cannot do it.
We heard that.
Out of that particular initiative, a proposal has arisen that we develop collaboratively for consideration of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, a public sector investment proposal for development of the cocoa industry costed over the next couple of years. That is the only way it will happen. It cannot happen by the isolated, siloed initiatives of individual institutions, with all the best intentions, sir.
All right, could we have an understanding how many farmers are there in Trinidad?
1,163 at the last count, because we have prepared a dossier on the state of the cocoa industry in order to argue our case before the international.
Have they all registered with your board, or you just got that analysis by your team of people going around?
They are names that are on our records and where they live and where they operate, yes.
And have they been verified as continuing farmers?
Yes.
They are. So you would say that they're approximately 1,100.
And 63.
You have an idea of the acreage of cultivation by them? And
I can ask my CEO to perhaps take over.
Through you, Chair. We did a comprehensive census last year. That's where some of our expenses went. I could take you back a little bit before that, where we inherited data from the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board, on which we had registered and we were in contact with 1,300 farmers, cocoa farmers. A lot of them had moved on to other things. So by the time we did this survey last year, we found out that there are 1,163 more or less active farmers, different degrees of activity. Of those 1,163, we found out that 660 of them were actually harvesting their cocoa for a business. I mean, there are other farms within the 1,163 where farmers would be venturing into the cocoa farms, not necessarily to take care of the cocoa trees, but to harvest a crop or two. So those who were seriously engaged, 660 of them. The total acreage under cocoa, 4,841 hectares. And if you need it in acres, I can give it.
That's all right. And,
okay. The acreage that was harvested, though, by the 660 farmers, is 3,095 hectares. So out of that 4,841 hectares covered by cocoa, 1,948 hectares were in a state of abandonment. What we sought to do through these field officers is to develop the relationships and connections with these 660 farmers and attempt to revive the others who are not actively involved. We have so far been able to pull out 84 farmers who had decided to pack up cocoa. So they're now back on the front burner, engaged in activities on their farms. There's a training exercise we conduct that is done in the field. And because of its uniqueness, it's called the Farmer Field School. It's conducted in the field. And there is a field school that is conducted once per month in each cluster. And we have determined that there are about 18 clusters that we can work with in Trinidad and Tobago. Bear in mind, we took this kind of approach from a project that stemmed from the Ministry of Agriculture, where in 2013, they had developed 12 clusters with the CCIB, Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board. So that has now grown from 12 to 18 clusters. And in these clusters, we hold one training program every month.
Thank you for that elucidation. Just may I, the chairman indicated that the price of the cocoa on the international market was around 2,500 to 10,000 US per metric ton. We are selling about 500. How do you assist your farmers? Do the farmers sell internationally directly, or they come? Just give us an understanding of when the farmers produce their cocoa beans, what happens from there on?
Through you, Chair, the price for the fine beans tend to be from about 3,500 US per ton upwards to roughly 10,000 per ton. Trinidad and Tobago is experiencing some of the better prices. We get around 6,000 now, 6,000 US. There are one or two groups getting up to 7,000 and 7,500 US per ton. Because of the opening up of the industry, the former activities of the former company, Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board, doesn't exist, well, to a great extent. However, the Cocoa Development Company is interacting with these players to ensure that things are done at international standards and international levels. Just to name one or two, this month gone, January, there's an international regulation put out by the European Union that says if the beans carry a cadmium content above a certain level, I think it is 1 microgram per kilogram, it will not be accepted. So we have been working with the farmers to ensure that the beans are within that minimum residue limit of cadmium. Among other aspects of the development of the post-harvest processing of the beans, we've been working with the farmers to ensure that when they approach the market, that the market would be acceptable to them and that they would get some of the better prices. Yeah. Our marketing structure, the Cocoa Development Company, has been seeking out some of these better markets. And in fact, we have changed the game for fermentation, where we're doing a unique type of fermentation called a micro-lot fermentation process that enhances the final results of the beans. These beans would then be marketed not just to the general chocolatiers, but to niche markets that are willing to pay the higher price. And in fact, may I add that over the last year, we have seen a 37% increase in price of the beans locally when they are purchased by the buyer who is going to do export. So the farmers are getting a 37% increase on their wet beans when they sell those beans now.
How is it regulated? You have the producer in the farm producing the cocoa, getting the beans. Who dries it, or ferments it? And who are the buyers, and are they registered with you all, or they're general buyers across the country? And who do the exporting?
Through you, Chair, the traditional buyers, fermenters, and exporters are the ones that we would have met. Because the entire landscape for developing beans and conforming to different standards have been changing over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had to tutor these traditional buyers and fermenters into the correct practices that would give you the correct end result. Some of these we have found they are a little bit slow to adopt the new practices, but working with the 660 active farmers out of the 1163 that I mentioned earlier, we have had roughly 75 of them training in these new skills and actually graduating from specialized courses we're doing with them, holding their hands and showing them in the field exactly what must be done. And we have seen recently 5 new fermenters who are getting involved in exporting. We also have 6 new exporters. What we have found is that these new people who have adopted the new practices are getting some of the better prices. We feel that those who are the traditional ones, who are a little bit slow in adopting and changing, would join eventually and change their practices so that they too could enjoy some of the better prices. So there's a variation in the prices across the board, where the big fermenters are not necessarily getting the best of the prices.
Just 2 last questions. How many fermenters are there, and how many exporters are there? And is the role of the Cocoa Development Company one that will help to regulate the industry? As you said, you are helping, but is there a role for you to help to regulate that issue of the purchase for fermenting and then from the buyers and then the exporters? And there's where the Exim Bank and so on comes in.
Just through you, Chair, just to deal with the regulating of the industry. When the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board existed, it was by an act of Parliament, and it had regulations, and it was able to regulate the industry through the regulations. In the current scenario, what the tools that are available are more moral suasion and providing the evidence that quality relates to what you're able to sell in the market. So the element of enforcing regulations are out. What we have instituted, however, is that cocoa that is being exported from Trinidad and Tobago, for example, must get a stamp of a certificate of origin. And we are using that mechanism to, if you will, impose or direct or guide the quality considerations in the absence of regulations to enforce. Because what we are saying is the Cocoa Development Company cannot stamp for export something that we know will upset the market and reduce our reputation. So this is the kind of nuanced approach to regulations that we have done.
CEO, you have the answer there?
Yes. Through you, Chair, again. Sorry. Let me say that we have 7 exporters who are always around, and we have now added 4. I have 4 here on my list that are new. We had 6 fermenters. We now have 11 fermenters. Let me also add something for the benefit of all listening to us at this time. There is a mark of excellence, which we call the certification mark, that has been registered with the Intellectual Property Organization. And when we visited at the TIC, we had a booth there, and we had lots of people coming across through our booth with different kinds of interest in cocoa. But when we met the potential importers, one of the important questions they were asking is, how do you certify that the beans we're going to get today is the same kind of bean we're going to get next year? Do you have a certificate? And that was the birth of the idea of getting a certification mark. It took us about a year to get it. We got it last year in August. But it goes with a number of standards. They're the ISO standards, 1114, 2541, 2561, and so on. And they govern the different food safety aspects as it relates to cocoa as a food, so that we would be able to interact with the farmers, teach them, show them the different skills, the different technology that will allow them to develop their bean to the standards to be certified with the certification mark. Chairman alluded also to the certificate of origin. it is becoming even more important now because we are aware that there are lots of people coming through our various ports in the south, and we were made aware that cocoa beans may be coming from our neighboring countries. When we promise a buyer, an importer, that they're going to get what we call the 4T brand for our cocoa, 4T stands for True Trinidad and Tobago Trinitario, we have to be certain that when we stamp a certificate, that it is indeed the true Trinidad and Tobago Trinitario. As Chairman alluded, we are working with different stakeholders, with different institutional support, and we have full support of the Cocoa Research Center at the University of the West Indies. And they're currently doing a fingerprinting of different beans throughout the country for us. We are extending that exercise to our neighboring countries too, so that when we get beans from the buyers or the exporters to be able to certify what is going out, we are able to do an analysis of those beans quickly and determine if those beans are mixed or diluted in some way with other beans.
So every export comes through your company for certification?
Yes.
And based on approximately 500 metric tons and approximately 6,000 US you're receiving, Trinidad could possibly be exporting about 3 million US in cocoa annually?
That's correct, yes.
So we could be receiving close to about 20 million TT in cocoa export. So if we make that 5 times, we could be receiving $100 million. Can we charge you with that responsibility to help in bringing Trinidad and Tobago to that level? I'm sure the Minister of Agriculture will want that, and the country will need that. So you have a major job and a portfolio there, so we look forward to that. Thank you very much for your answers.
Yes, Tim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just by way of clarity, Mr. CEO, you're saying that locals receive beans from elsewhere and pretend that they were grown in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, that is correct.
What benefit would that bring to them?
I could only imagine, through you, Chair, that if someone lands on our shores and offers a native beans at $1 and they have no monies in their pocket, they will offer $1 and get it. And if those same beans could be traded at $20, let's say, that's a profit of $19 on the investment.
But
so there's that temptation.
Yeah, but they don't trade with you.
No, they don't.
So why can't they, outside of your facility, do the same thing? What is the benefit of coming through you?
Maybe I should clarify. The beans do not come through us, really. What happens is that people who want to export beans, we facilitate them with a certificate of origin, which gives the importer a level of comfort.
Oh, I see.
About the beans he's receiving.
I see.
It means that it is incumbent upon the company, the Cocoa Development Company, to give a foolproof certificate saying these beans are indeed true Trinidad and Tobago Trinitario beans.
I understand.
Hence the fingerprinting.
I understand. You raised the concept of cadmium, I think it was a while ago, and the cadmium content. Just for clarification, what is that and how is that controlled to meet the foreign market standard?
Okay. There are a few heavy metals affecting crops around the world. Cadmium is only one of them.
Yes.
Mercury, of course, and there's lead and so on. What we have found about the cocoa tree, if there's cadmium in the soil, it will take it up. It loves to scavenge the soil for cadmium. There are other crops that would scavenge the soil for cadmium. Sunflower is one, and the brassica family, which will be cabbage, cauliflower, kale, and so on. We also know that shellfish carries a high content of cadmium. We find it passing strange that they would tackle cocoa and not speak about the other crops or agricultural produce that carries cadmium. But we are cognizant that we are on this side of the world as a producer nation, and it's being sold to the other side of the world, the consumer nations. And somehow in the business of cocoa, people have always tried to control the prices. what the CDC is attempting to do is make sure we get best price for sustainability for the farmers. In the area of cadmium, what we have done, and we are not doing this alone, this is a whole orchestrated business where the ministry is involved in breeding plants that would be better in terms of uptake of cadmium. In fact, a study was just recently concluded at the University of the West Indies because they have the world's only gene bank of cocoa that is so big, 2,300 different types of cocoa. They're able to do a study on the different varieties and see which one would not take up a lot of cadmium. And those results came out just last week. So the breeding work has been done by the ministry. Further studies are done by the university. And we are doing work with the farmers to ensure that cadmium isn't put into the cocoa inadvertently. For instance, you can use a fertilizer that is laden with cadmium as a pollutant during the manufacturing process. So we, on our side, what we do is we test the fertilizers for cadmium, and we advise the farmers to use or not to use.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me ask again. Now, I have noted the pains your chairman took to remind this committee, and I quote you here in your submission to us, that the company does not directly engage in the marketing and trade of cocoa and cocoa-based products, but provides information and technical advisory and support services on production, processing, market development, and trends, explores trade and market opportunities. You go on to say, though established under the Companies Act, it is not a commercial, that means CDC, is not a commercial entity. It's not an income-earning entity, but a development institution which functions as a cocoa hub. We understand that. In those circumstances, and I gather that you all are executing that role as best as you can in all of your circumstances. You did say elsewhere in your report to us that your work program is a little bit, what's the term, stymied, is a little bit low. Your work program is not as mightyful as it could be. Is that correct? Am I correct in so saying?
Yes, sir.
I would like the CEO to tell me why is that so, if he can.
In our plans,
in light of this very important mandate, when I gather from your submissions here this morning that the Ministry of Agriculture is driving the improvement and the expansion of the industry, why is that so?
I could tell you how we have gotten to this point and the circumstances that exist. I may not be able to tell you why those circumstances arose. What I can say is that we have a very ambitious program of work that we have developed coming out of the strategic plan. And the strategic plan points to expansion of the industry through two ways: new planting of new lands, as well as rehabilitation of the abandoned fields. Based on our planning and our work programs, we had suggested budgetary totals for a 3-year plan amounting to 45 million, roughly 15 million per year. When we saw what came in the budget, that is what would have caused us to pull back.
All right. Now, you do not earn money, as I read a while ago from your submission to us. And you fortuitously found from the old entity, which you succeeded, which you have been using, and you have expended about 7 million of that so far. In light of the fact that you have this reduced work program, and I notice as well that in your 2018-19 submission to the Ministry of Finance, you are seeking an increase in your subvention from roughly 1.8 to 2.8. Am I correct? Yes, I am.
May I say that?
Yes.
Through you, Chair,
Yes.
that last statement I'm not aware of.
May I, with respect, intervene just to correct?
Yeah.
What we were revealing is what the allocations have been.
Yes.
So the allocations went to 2.8 million.
Went to 2.8.
Yes.
Right, and this is where I am now. Why? I mean, if your work program is what it is, your staffing have been constrained to what it is, you are using money that you met in an account to keep things going, and you were asked earlier, what have you been doing with it? And then I take note, and let me come to my specific concerns here now. I take note of your, say, financial statements for the year ended 30th of September 2015. I noticed that your professional fees for 2015 amounted to $555,000 as opposed to $72,000 in 2014. Now I know some of you, most of you, if not all of you, may not have been around at that time or those times, but your records should be able to tell us what accounted for that substantial 2015 increase in professional fees. Yeah, 2014 to 2015, a substantial increase. You see, when I look at your mandate, when I take into account your work program, when I take into account the submissions you made this morning, the large chunk of your expenditure, including drawdowns from that savings account of $13 million, largely it is spent on administrative and general expenses.
May I, Chair?
Yes, indeed.
When this particular board assumed responsibility, we had a company that had an administrative assistant and a driver. That was the staff of the Cocoa Development Company as at April 2016. We had no records of financial information or systems. We could not say, the only thing that we had was the bank account and what the money is in the bank and some broad metrics. As a board, we knew there would come a time when we would have to get accounts, but we didn't have the financial statement. So we had to deploy and outsource arrangements to take files with documents and what have you, prepare financial accounts, outsource the financial administrative function. We had nobodies. We had to outsource the corporate secretarial function because the board was, had to meet and we had to have that function. So there was a whole slew of things that had to be done to bring us up to a point where we could do, for example, paying of salaries and all that sort of thing. So those were the critical things: the corpsec fees, accounting fees, auditing fees, the financial administrative fees. These were all outsourced because we had nobodies.
You see, the reason why I asked this, right, I am getting an understanding that the the Ministry of Agriculture is driving by, I'm aware, nurturing trees and by the millions, and so trying to improve the agri sector generally, of which cocoa is an important subset. I understand your mandate. I understand the limitations of that mandate. I understand you don't earn income. I understand that you have been drawing down on savings that you met, according to you, fortuitously. But when I look at this, I'm getting the impression that, especially in light of the fact that you told me your work program is stymied, I'm getting the impression that the company exists for itself based on these records. I mean, nothing pejorative to you, Mr. Chairman, because I must tell you now, I gather that you are earnest in your efforts and you're trying to do something useful for our country in your commission, in your seat. But again, when I look at, for example, your administrative and general expenses, which your operating officer told us is the largest chunk of your expenditure, including the drawdowns from the savings. I see here in 2016, for an example, events and seminars, $437,000, just round it off. And I saw again, meetings and conferences, $22,000. I'm asking myself, what is the difference between those two? Could somebody quickly tell me?
Yeah, can you put on your mic, sir?
2016, one would have been, included in that would have been appearance at the TIC, the Trade and Investment Convention. One of the challenges that the CDCTT had is a question of institutional credibility. Who are you? Nobody knows you.
All right.
That sort of thing.
Let me take note of another matter here. In 2015, your janitorial services, according to your statement, financial statement, amounted to $8,400, but in 2016, it amounted to $18,882. Now, I want to ask, are you still at Yard Street in Chaguanas?
No.
Where are you now?
At,
Could you press?
sorry, Mulchan Suchan Road.
And I gather you're paying a slightly less rent.
No.
Well, no, I saw your rent worked out in 2015 to $238,625, and in 2016, $207,000. When I did the calculation, it looked like you were paying 19 and now you're paying 17. Am I correct?
Just refresh me. What year?
No, 2015 to 2016. The rent for 2015, according to this, says $238,625. And for 2016, the figure here, the comparative figure is $207,000. When I calculated, it appears as though there's a slight reduction in the rent. Based on these figures alone, if I'm wrong, stop me.
Well, I don't know about 2015. I know what we were paying at Yard Street was $17,250 per year. Per month, sorry, per month.
Right. Now, I see, as I was telling you a while ago, a substantial...
And how much you are currently paying at Mulchan Suchan?
At Mulchan Suchan, it's about 66 or 72.
Per month?
Per month?
Yes.
From 17,000 to 66,000?
Yes.
What? What?
From 17,000 to 66,000?
You see why we are concerned? Because as an entity with the largest chunk of your subvention, for which you are now seeking an increase in subvention, spending a substantial or all, including the drawdown from the savings, what is it doing? Is this company only for itself? Is it achieving its mandate? Now, I understand what your mandate is. I do understand the drive of the Minister of Agriculture. You said it. But you see where we are. Again, I was pointing out to you the janitorial services jumped by $10,000. What accounts for that? The place must be 6 times bigger.
Let's see. 9 of them, 5 plus 4.
and with a small staff and a small team. I mean, you know, this is a matter of concern. Salaries and wages moved from $257,000 in 2015 to $345,000 in 2016. And I also see a subhead here for donations and sponsorship. Are you saying that this company sponsors and gives donations in your circumstances? I just want to know.
I want to deal with them sequentially. With respect to
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you are the appropriate person to be answering this, you know. We have somebody here who, although she's there for 1 month, she has records. I don't want you to be answering all of this. The finance person and the CEO should be answering this. Please. And if they were not present at the time, they are before a select committee of the Parliament, this Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, presumably with records. That's what we want to hear. We're not dealing with personalities. We're dealing with the entity. So I would like the CEO and or the finance person to answer. Mr. Chairman, you have exerted sufficient energy for the morning. Please.
Yeah. And Ms. Marla Pratap, as you are answering or whoever, the CEO, could you share with this committee what were the circumstances that prompted this company to move from 17,000 on Yard Street to 66,000 Mulchan Suchan Road? What were the factors, right, that generated that decision to move?
CEO.
The CEO. CEO, could you answer?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Let me just take us back into some information that may not be in our at our disposal right now. The original office of the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board consisted of 2 floors. Because of the change in company and the residual staff, which was, I understand at some stage, a driver and an admin assistant, it sought to reduce the space that they occupied. So they gave up 1 floor and was on the upper floor. When I took up office there, I found out, and it was information shared across the board, that the building itself was not OSHA compliant. We were on a month-to-month rental. The landlord said he wanted to increase the rental rate. So that $17,500 reflect half of the payment, or roughly half of the payment of what the building would have been going for. Parking was limited, extremely limited, I think 3 vehicles. We were supposed to be servicing a public, the cocoa farming fraternity of 1,100 plus. People would have been visiting us. And based on the mandate, and based on the strategic plan, and the program of works, we considered the space that would be required to function properly and efficiently. I understand before I took the position there that the board was actively searching for appropriate office accommodation, and that process had been taking place for 2 years. For some reason, it was extremely difficult to find an appropriate place. At some stage, they zeroed into 3 different properties that were ranging between $48,000 and $66,000 per month. Oh, sorry. I have it in front of me. So one of the buildings was $56,000, another at $125,000, a third one for $40,000. There was a 4th one for $65,000, and the one we currently occupy, which was 72,000. Let me say that number 1 to 4 that I just mentioned had an estimated cost of outfitting ranging from 1.2 million to 1.5 million. So although the company was searching for office space, yes, I do have it. Max Murphy Street, all in Chaguanas. Max Murphy Street, Ramsaran Street, one in Montrose, one in Edinburgh, and the final one, of course, Mulchan Sivchan Road. The cost of
Let me ask, only because you submitted it, the company had a special taste and focus only for Chaguanas, apparently?
Let me say that when one looked at the concentration of the stakeholders that we were to serve, the cocoa farmers, we found that in and around Chaguanas was more centralized to meet the farmers and for the farmers to meet with us.
You mean, notwithstanding you didn't have a trading relationship, it was more administrative and promotion and targeting markets, man, you could operate anywhere very effectively with your mandate.
Actually, I beg to differ.
Okay, well, I beg to hear you, please.
Yes, sure.
Continue.
So although there wasn't a trading function, the services of the company are deeply entrenched in that act of trading, such that farmers have to bring samples to us for us to examine. We have to go to them. They have problems on a daily basis that they would like us to address. We are dealing in an environment where there are lots of scary things happening. There's an impending disease that we are looking out for. It's right knocking on our doors. It's right next door in Venezuela. It's called the frosty pod disease. What we hope to do is people have samples of, they see symptoms in the field. They get up, they go in the field, they see symptoms, and they wish to know, is this the disease? And I'm just drawing on one example. But farmers on a daily basis interact with us in some form or another. We also recognize that there were people knocking on our doors as new investors. And we are interacting with these people to bring them out as a new breed of business, agripreneur kind of outfit to move the industry.
Yes, I've heard the point. Could you continue along the line you were telling us about how you arrived at the building at 44, at 72,000 or thereabout? Please.
So what I need to also add to this conversation is the floor space that was going with each of these buildings. We found Mulchan Sivchan Road to be quite advantageous for the breadth of the program of works we had. So that the space there is 9,900 square feet. The one for $56,000 was just 5,000 square feet. So on a square foot basis, and I wouldn't go through all of them, Mulchan Sivchan turned out to be the cheapest one. And in fact, there were 2 floors that we were more inclined to take. And it was, the offer that came to us was that if we were to take the 3rd floor, we would get the 3rd floor at a substantially reduced price. And that made the whole building more appealing on a square footage basis as well as...
Mr. Chairman, and did you all spend money as well on outfitting that building?
Yeah.
How much did you spend on outfitting that building that you are now at?
We had budgeted 0.6 million, which is the lowest amount of the 5 buildings for outfitting the building. To date, we have not spent any substantial amount in occupying that new building. But there are some other bits I need to declare to this committee which guided the final choice.
No, before you go there, would you put in writing what is the current cost for outfitting that building?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Give the current cost.
Yes, and
Let complete what he was saying.
Oh, sir, please,
Yes,
continue.
continue, Mr. CEO.
So I just made the last point a minute ago that the marginal cost for occupying the third floor was very appealing and substantially reduced the overall price per square foot of the building. We were given written approval to also sublet any space within the building, which would have allowed us to earn some kind of income or cover some kind of cost of the entire building. Bear in mind that the program of works that we had envisaged before we got the budget would have allowed us to use the total floor space of that building. With the allocation we got, though, we recognized that we had to make some changes in the program of works. And it may give us the opportunity to sublet one of the 3 floors.
As it now stands, you have 3 floors, 9,000 square feet, not yet subleased any part thereof, and of course, just about 9 members of staff?
The staffing is we now have 13 members of staff, but what we use the floor space, we have not done any changes to the layout of the floor space. It allows us to do considerable training and interaction with our stakeholders.
I thank you very kindly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to speak to the model, the previous model, and the existing model. And maybe either the chairman or the CEO can assist. Previously, with the Cocoa and Coffee Board, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they operated as a facilitator in terms of the sale of the beans, am I correct?
The Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board had sole responsibility for purchase and export of cocoa beans in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, the beans were purchased by the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board, the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board became the owner of the beans that were exported.
But that, and therefore that was a guarantee market for the farmers.
It provided a guaranteed price for the farmer, yes.
And now, the Cocoa Development Company, with a new mandate, is not involved in that commercial part of the industry.
It's not, no, it's not, by mandate, no.
And so it is left up to private enterprise to drive the purchase and exporting of the beans.
Correct.
Having outlined those 2 models, which would you say has been more beneficial to the farmers and the industry? So, in other words, has there been a decline in the industry based on the change in the model?
Through you, Chair, the jury is still out on that particular one because the decline in the cocoa industry, the secular decline in the cocoa industry took place when the Cocoa and Coffee Industry Board existed. The only impact I think that is enough to be said there. When the Cocoa and Coffee Board existed, there was a secular decline even while it existed. The dissonance in the industry was created when you changed from that model to the current model because the operators who interacted, who took the beans from the farmers, who did the primary processing of the beans, who exported of the beans, did that as an outsourced activity on behalf of the board, for which they got cash advances. So there was, put it this way, there was less risk, if you want to put it this way, on behalf that was undertaken by those who operated in intermediary positions between the farmer and the ultimate export.
I get that. But the Cocoa Development Companies now has been in existence since 2013, am I correct? Or 14?
2014.
2014. So while you did say the jury is still out, and I understand that there was a decline, the decline would have started under the Cocoa and Coffee Board. During this period, what would you say, in your own opinion? Do you think that the industry has benefited or is moving in the direction it should be moving based on what the program of the Cocoa Development Company is?
What I would say is that the Cocoa Development Company has not been allowed to function. It has not been functional in terms of the range of responsibilities entrusted to it because it does not have the resources to perform those functions. It is partially endowed, and with those resources have been able to make a contribution.
Well, that's quite clear. Can I pose then to the Permanent Secretary? Do you have a comment you'd like to make on the response that just got from the chairman in terms of the resources to the company?
Chair, as you know, there's a process, a budgetary process that allows for the allocation of funds to entities, state entities, and therefore it is the remit really. We will send down all the details, and as they have a strategic plan that will be forwarded to the Ministry of Finance, but the allocation then comes to us based on the estimates. This is an annual process, and therefore the ministry per se does not have that amount of leeway in terms of the budgetary allocation to any entity. Yes?
I have a few questions before I ask Dr. Tim, and then we will bring the curtains down. Mrs. Crystal, you want? Okay, right. First of all, I would like to ask Mr. Chairman, has the strategic plan been approved and operationalized over for the 5-year period by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Finance? The plan that you have drawn up for the cocoa company, has it been approved by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Finance? Mr. Chairman, could you press your knob, sir?
The plan drawn up by the Cocoa Development Company is draft, and it was based on the draft of the National Cocoa Development Plan. It has not been approved in the formal sense in which you are.
Has it been operationalized even though it has not been approved by the cocoa company? That is the point I'm asking and I'm seeking.
The cocoa company was constrained to have a rationale for its existence, and yes, it has been operationalized.
So you have violated again, you have breached. And that's another breach that the cocoa company has committed. You have published your audited accounts before an annual general meeting has been held. That's a breach. You have now breached a second element of regulations, and that is in the state manual for companies, that before you can implement and operationalize your strategic plan, it must be approved by the line ministry and by the Ministry of Finance. You will agree with me that this is a breach?
May I?
Yes, of course.
With respect, I would argue that it is not a breach. And even if it were a breach, it is a breach that I, as the chairman, will accept full responsibility for, because I had been given a mandate and I have to, together with the board, I have to have a contextual rationale in which to operate. Otherwise, the company, we do nothing.
Mr. Chairman, that I do not know whether you're familiar with the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual, but I'm looking at page 28 of that manual on the strategic plans, and it is very clear, as the former Prime Minister who has passed on used to say, pellucidly clear, that you have to seek prior approval from your line ministry, okay, before you can effect and operationalize your plan. So I'm saying that you keep taking responsibility for these breaches. I'm not too sure what the ministry, the line ministry, has to say on this matter. That is the Ministry of Agriculture, Permanent Secretary, and the Investments Division. Because you cannot have a company repeatedly violating and breaching established rules and regulations, and you have the chairman taking responsibility. There must be a sanction for these things. Otherwise, what we'll have? What are we going to have in the state enterprise sector? We're going to have chaos and confusion, even though we are trying to achieve certain objectives. We have to abide by the rules that have been established. Otherwise, we are going to have a situation that is unacceptable. So I would like to ask the permanent secretary, in a situation where a board chooses to do its own thing without your approval of a strategic plan, what would you recommend to this committee, or what would you do to deal with that situation? We would like to know as a committee.
Okay, Chair. I have, as you would be aware, I came into the ministry in June. So in reviewing all the documents, I did see a draft strategic plan for the Cocoa Development Company. So it was in draft. And as far as I was aware, it had not yet gone through the full process. So my understanding was that in any event, the company needs some kind of plan. In the interim, while this process is ongoing, the company would have been working with some sort of framework, okay? So that was my understanding, that they are working with a framework pending the full process for the...
But would you have approved that framework? Because you are supervising this company. You are responsible as the permanent secretary for the funding that would be released to that body. So if they are doing it, as you said, they have to do something, meaning there's a framework established. Would that framework require the expressed approval of the permanent secretary? Or can a board just take it upon itself in the absence of this approval, even though it's an interim approval from the line ministry? Can a board unilaterally implement a strategic plan? That is the point that I'm trying to clear up on behalf of this committee.
There's a process for the approval, so the board cannot really unilaterally. But as I said, this is what I came into, that was my observation.
I think I understand what you're saying. Can I go to the Ministry of Finance Investment Division for guidance on this matter?
Okay, Chair, what has been happening is that we review the strategic plans, the approved strategic plans of state enterprises. There are some state enterprises that have been delinquent, and we write them on a continuous basis. Our last letter that we would have sent was late last year, to the state enterprises, reminding them that they needed to submit their strategic plans. And by and large, some of them, well, they have submitted. We are in receipt of the draft strategic plan of this company as well. Our business analysts have analyzed the draft strategic plan in the absence of an approved strategic plan, and we have informed our minister of the contents of the strategic plan. But we have been writing to to all the state enterprises who have been delinquent.
Yeah, but yeah, you said you have received, but did you give your approval, that is the Ministry of Finance, for the Cocoa Board to proceed?
We cannot give our approval unless it is an approved strategic plan that comes to the Ministry of Finance.
And you haven't had an approved?
No.
May I ask Mrs. Critchlow, and then I'll come to first.
No, it's along the same lines. And I probably just need to get an understanding. Whether it is the board did not understand that they needed to send an approved strategic plan. Because I am looking at the documents submitted, and they would have submitted a strategic plan to the Ministry of Agriculture in 2017. And they also submitted a plan in July 2018. So what is the turnaround time in those institutions to return the plan? Because I take the chairman's position. They cannot continue to not operate for more than a year in the absence of the necessary approvals. So we probably need to get an understanding from the Ministry of Finance and Agriculture. What is the turnaround time for returning those plans? Because as a chairman, sitting managing a board, you need a framework within which to operate. So I think that needs to be clarified.
Permanent Secretary, what is the turnaround time for a plan to be approved? As far as you're aware, I know that you came around 6 months ago, but,
Yeah, but
what is the normal period?
normally, the strategic plans also go through cabinet, I believe. But this, from the checks of my record, this has not yet been done. But it does not normally take a very long time. Once everything, and we check all the information, and it goes straight through, and it does not take a month.
All right. I just have another area to clarify.
Chairman, you passed.
No, I know you have a...
It's on the same matter.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead first.
Yes, so I need to get some clarity. One, I understand, as my colleague has said, the position of the chairman and the board, that they could not just sit on ice pending the approval of a strategic plan. Is it, and maybe somebody from the investment division, could you outline the process for the approval of the strategic plan? Could someone from the investment division outline that process, please?
Chairman, if I may, first of all, the strategic plan is basically operational in nature, and the approval, after the plan is submitted by the board to the line ministry, they have to approve the plan first before it is submitted to the Ministry of Finance. And then we review the plan and may give a counter approval. But first off, it must go through the line ministry.
So that it is the plan must be approved by the board, which will then forward the plan to the ministry. The ministry will then approve and forward to the corporation sole. Is that what you've just outlined?
Yes, precisely.
So am I to understand that the plan submitted by the Cocoa Development Company in draft to the ministry, that was in fact the start of the process for the approval? Was it approved by the board before it was sent, that draft plan? I want to get some clarity on that, please.
Mr. Chairman? Yes?
Yes, sir. The board developed.
No, we just want a direct answer. Was it approved by the board? That is a
Yes.
direct question.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Foster, go ahead.
So that is in fact the strategic plan approved by the board, so you can stop calling it a draft now, that has been sent to the ministry for approval. And the ministry must now engage in its process to approve that plan and forward it to investment division. Are we all clear now on what is the status of this strategic plan? Thank you.
So, Madam Permanent Secretary, the ball appears to be in your court because the cocoa company, they have done their part. And I agree with Mrs. Critchlow that this thing has taken an inordinately long time from 2016, 17, and we are in 19, and the plan is still in just on somebody's desk, gathering dust. So I would like the ministry to inform this committee in writing when will it be able to give its final approval of that plan and have it forwarded to the Ministry of Finance Investments Division so that they can have sight of the approved plan. So Mr. Rudder, who is the chairman, can proceed properly to do what he's doing. Mr. Rudder, chairman.
With respect, may I make a slight correction to the timelines that you have just indicated? The Ministry of Agriculture would only have gotten a draft strategic plan from the Cocoa Development Company towards the end of 2017, because that draft strategic plan of the Cocoa Development Company emanated from the draft National Cocoa Industry Strategic Plan, which was developed and completed and submitted in mid-2017.
Okay.
So that's the sequence.
Yeah. I just have a few clarification I'd like to have before I ask Dr. Tim Gobising to get in. There is a sum of $186,250, $100, given or apparently would have been provided for auditing and accounting services. And this came in the form of fees in 2015, and in 2016, it was $111,775, $100 that is. Could you share with this committee, first of all, what were these services, what services rather were provided by the expenditure, audit and accounting fees in both 2015 and 2016? And who provided these services? And was any report on the internal auditing of the company generated and submitted to the management team and the board for consideration? I don't know if the chairman would like to answer this, or your CEO.
I would answer that. 2016, 2017, these were financial management administrative functions. As I said, we inherited a company in which we had no records, no bills, and all what have you. And this would have been provided, this function was outsourced to do all the accounting functions in the company, including the preparation of
Which company was engaged to carry out this exercise?
AGs.
Who?
AGs.
AGs, I suppose. It is AEGIS?
AEGIS, yes.
And that is what, an accounting firm?
It's an accounting firm, yeah. What? It's an offshoot of PwC. I'm told it's an offshoot of PwC.
Okay, so they would have been engaged by the company. The other area I would like to have clarified is this. Madam Permanent Secretary, I think it's a very messy situation. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. You have someone called the COO. But the COO is responsible for the following functions: corporate secretary, accountant or accounting responsibilities, human resource responsibilities, procurement responsibility. Now, when you collapse all these functions under this broad heading of corporate secretary, and you talk about risk management, where my colleague pointed out some of the risk that one has to take into account, then you don't have a fraud policy given what you have submitted to us. There is the risk of fraud that could take place in this company because everything is collapsed into one function. That is an untidy situation. So, Madam Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, this is something I would like to have your views on, because this is something that we need to correct as a matter of urgency. You cannot have a corporate secretary performing procurement function, human resource function at the same time. It is impossible. So could you tell us what steps you intend to take as Permanent Secretary to correct this situation?
Chair, in the short term, we will have some discussions with the CEO and the team, but moving forward into the new fiscal period, the estimates period, we hope to address with their submissions how funds could be expanded so that the company can have greater diversity in its human resources and so be able to deliver on its mandate.
And the final area I would like to raise, Madam Permanent Secretary, you need to take urgent and immediate steps to have established in this cocoa company an internal audit function. You cannot be spending public monies without any robust internal controls. That is a recipe for disaster in any organization. So that is a function I would like the Ministry of Agriculture to meet with some urgency with the board, with the company, to establish with some degree of immediacy this question of an internal audit function so that public monies can be properly be accounted for. I'm not saying anything is untoward, but there's always room for these kinds of developments to take place. I think my colleague, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, and then Mrs. Coburn, and then Dr. Tim Gopi-Singh, and then we'll wind up.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Only to ask, as an extension of the very important assessment that you have just put to the Permanent Secretary, was this a revelation to you this morning, PS, or you were aware of that state of affairs for some time past?
I have been aware of it based on some documents which were submitted to the ministry.
How long now have you become aware of this very untenuous and risky, troubling state of affairs?
I would have had discussions with the CEO this year. This year? Yes, it's this year I would have had discussions with the CEO at that time, January.
And that would be the first time you had become aware of this untenuous state of affairs?
Yes, yes.
I thank you. But before I close, I have observed from the records that a gallant attempt was made to cause some of the operators in the CPEP company to be attached to for training in cocoa husbandry to your program. Mr. Chairman, could you just very quickly tell us what transpired in that regard and how effective it has been and the portents for the future?
May I ask that to my CEO?
Most certainly.
Through you, Chair. Because we are heavily involved in training, and because we recognize that labor is a major constraint to any of the work programs associated with the farmers, and because we wanted to move on with some aspect of our work program, our cocoa extension, our cocoa development officers were engaging the farmers to carry out operations in the field. As we saw that wave of enthusiasm through the farmers, and because of the absence of labor, we found it necessary to locate people who might be interested in learning something in cocoa husbandry. Having had conversations with the business development manager at CPEP, they thought it was a good opportunity to expose some of their workers to this kind of training, because as part of their mandate, they have to prepare those people for when they would have exhausted their contractual terms at CPEP. So we chose a few areas around, mainly around South Trinidad, the clusters, and we had those workers appear for actual training on the ground in cocoa farms. I would like to also add that there were two interventions that we feel that would allow us to pick some low-hanging fruits, where we conducted a black pod spray program, because with the amount of rains Trinidad was experiencing, more than half of the pods were rotting. It's a special disease called black pod. And we engaged workers in spraying those fields, and in a matter of 2 months, we were able to treat 300 fields. There's another operation which we thought synchronized very tightly with what CPEP was doing, and it is in the use of mechanization in cocoa. Cocoa is naturally labor intensive because the tree behaves quite differently to all other fruit trees that we know. You can't just pick a cocoa pod. You will damage the tree and cause things to happen, extra growth. So all of these bits have been harnessed through some mechanized ways that we've been teaching the CPEP workers in. What I would like to say is that they too were enthusiastic. We had hoped to train, we had a specific number, I can't recall exactly what it was now. 45 is what we graduated in the end, but we were attempting a lot more than that to satisfy some of the labor vacuoles that exist around the country. But 45 of them were able to train, be graduated, and receive a certificate of training from the Cocoa Development Company.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to Mrs. Cobo now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your submission, I noted that you said you have done the formalization of the Lupino cluster. Could you give me some indication as to whether cocoa is being resuscitated in the Lupino area, and if we can expect even greater things from that industry in Lupino?
Yes, through you, Chair. These 18 clusters, the intention as part of the work program is to establish them as business units. And just to keep it brief, I would say that Lupino was the very first cluster in our attempt to formalize as a business unit.
But is the industry being resuscitated? Because one of the complaints I get from the constituents in Lupino is that the industry is dying and nothing is being done to assist. So that's why I'm asking.
Let me say that you find people use these cliches all around, but we do have statistics that show where it's going. And we have, over the last 2 years of the life of this board and me being with this company for 1 year, we've seen a 24% increase in production. For those, well, I measure the country. I wouldn't be able to tell you today exactly what has happened in Lopino. We know each cluster has its own challenges, but I know that Lopino has forged ahead and has become the first officially registered cluster with that kind of work that we're doing.
Could you provide that to this committee in writing? Do you want about Lopino?
Yes.
So that the member can have a greater understanding of what you're saying.
I shall do so.
And my last question
yes, go
has
ahead.
to do with, I know that the company is organizing a National Cocoa Award ceremony on Sunday. What is the event about? What is it intended to achieve? And what's the cost involved?
Okay.
Thanks.
Associated with the quality parameters required for best beans and for getting best prices in the niche markets, we have recognized that farmers, and by the way, more than 60% of the a lot, maybe 75% of the farmers are above a certain age, above 61 years. When we analyzed the data, only 2% were under 30 years old. What we have found is people who have been doing the same thing every day for many years, it's extremely difficult to get them to change. Just to use some of the language you might be acquainted with, dancing of cocoa is not acceptable for international trade. So what you find is that that change process is extremely difficult. But getting back to the specific question, I just lost my train of thought there a little while. Yes. We thought that we could align that change of quality in the beans through a competition. Now, this has precedent in an international competition called the, we call it COEX, Cocoa of Excellence. It's held in France by Biodiversity International, and Trinidad has been winning, but we are allowed only 5 entries. What we thought we would do through this competition is get all the clusters, and when it was announced and launched in July last year, we had 15 established clusters, so we're hoping we'll get like 15 participants from each cluster, and therefore 225, and hopefully we'll pick up Tobago, which would have been the 16th cluster. We just completed the judging exercise 2 days ago. I want to tell you that we had an abundance of responses around the country. I've seen some of the finest beans. I chair the committee called the National Organizing Committee, and for the first time, we are holding this local leg of the competition. So the awards program on Sunday is to recognize the top 20 for Trinidad and Tobago, and to also from that pull out the top 5 that would represent Trinidad and Tobago at the biodiversity competition in France. That competition closes on the 28th of February, but the judging and release of those results customarily happens in October. So we will have to wait until October for those results.
Could you give us the location and the cost?
Yes. We are doing this award ceremony at the South Academy of the Performing Arts, SAPA building. We hope to have about 250 people in attendance. More than half of them would be farmers. And
the estimated cost?
For the entire project from July, inclusive of the awards function, will be $150,000.
All right, thank you very much. May I ask Dr. Tim Gopi Singh to ask the final question?
It's late now, but as we close, we have heard you provide some examples of how you are dealing with the resuscitation of the industry, which you have been formed. It has been created as a vehicle to promote and support resuscitation of a financially viable cocoa industry. You have given some examples of some of the things you're doing, but from an overarching perspective, you think you might be able to enumerate some of the broad areas that you're dealing with to resuscitate the industry by bringing more farmers in, resuscitate some of the fields that are dying, create employment, more employment, and also move to exporting more and resuscitating fields by bringing new cocoa trees to be planted and so on. Could you give us some idea about how you're really going to help in resuscitation, in addition to some of the things you mentioned earlier?
Excuse me. One of the important interventions we've had is a remake of the cocoa drying house, so that working together with the Cocoa Research Center at the UWI, as well as our line ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture, especially what is happening with the research in Centennial, we have been able to encourage farmers to look at a solar roof drying house, so that one doesn't have to open the roof, so to speak, and close it when rain is going to come. So this is a new piece of technology we have included in what we're doing. In terms of the traditional sun drying, we have found that over the last 20 years or so, the bigger operators have been using heated air, and that was done through diesel. And internationally, that's not acceptable anymore because
that's a technical aspect
yes.
of what you're dealing. How do you intend to resuscitate some of the fields, some of the farmers, resuscitate the plantation, replacing crops, etc.?
Yeah. Working with our partners in this, what we are doing is looking at replacing the type of plants we're using. And I think we are on top of it now, and full support from the ministry we've been getting, because what we found in the data that we collected is that the productivity of the trees in Trinidad right now is probably at its lowest for maybe the entire world, and there are reasons for it, which we are exploring and attempting to introduce some solutions that would solve that, so that as farmers, those who are existing, can use some of these new varieties and new types of plants that would allow for productivity to increase. I think that would be one of the major interventions that would allow farmers to recognize cocoa could make some money, because at low productivity levels, they are unable to afford to pay for labor. The second big constraint, of course, we said is labor, and outside of the CPEP module, we have been engaging the clusters to locate workers whom we can train, because cocoa training is extremely specific. We have already embarked, as I said, on the pruning of trees. Let me go back to the data. Most trees in Trinidad are too old. So most of the active fields, we are working with these farmers and coaching them more than training them into replacing trees that are more than 30 years old, so that they could become more productive. What is good is, in addition to replacing them, they're able to replace them more sensibly in a matrix that would allow higher pollination results, because we picked up that that is a problem with the industry, as well as using trees that are more resistant to diseases that are pending, like the frosty pod, and also using trees that would be less vigorous, so it wouldn't lead to excessive pruning every year, which is labor intensive. We are also looking at areas of drip irrigation. We are going to be putting down model farms around the country in each of these clusters, so farmers could see the results of drip irrigation. We understand that climate change is happening. The ministry understands it, and they are also trying to bring in new varieties that would be resistant to the drier weather or be able to withstand the higher rainfall. We are looking, I mentioned quite earlier, the cadmium concerns. We're examining fertilizers for cadmium and giving more guidance to the farmers in this regard.
Yeah, the resuscitation of some of those who went out of the business, is there?
Yes, I said earlier, 84 such farmers have returned. And we are currently increasing the size of the attendance at trainings with these clusters. Excuse me. And we are finding that more and more farmers are now paying attention to what's happening. And I think the new data that is coming out, the new business proposals that we are doing, The fact that it could generate more income, the fact that value added is also part of the business model. We find that farmers more and more are looking at it. Just last year, we had only 15 value-added producers in Trinidad. Now we have 40 value-added producers.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to suggest that there are several areas that we couldn't explore and pursue today because of the time limitation, but we shall submit those in writing to the chairman so that we can have written responses. Before we bring the curtains finally down, I would like to call on the Ministry of Agriculture's Permanent Secretary to make a few closing remarks, brief, as well as the chairman of the Cocoa Company. So, Madam Permanent Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. As indicated by both the chairman of the Cocoa Development Company and the CEO, we have been working in a number of collaborative areas. We didn't get the opportunity to hear from the research division today, but the research division also works closely with the company to advance the whole prospects of the cocoa industry. The issues that were raised concerning the strategic plan will be addressed with immediacy, and as well as the structure of the Cocoa Development Company. We hope to have some dialogue soon to be able to address the concerns raised by the committee. Thank you.
But with the CEO, COO, and the internal audit function.
Well, that is inclusive of the human resources.
Thank you
the
very
challenge.
much. My error. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you have the final say.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. First of all, thank you for the incisive questioning and the fact that you have thrown light on a couple of issues that we have been struggling with ourselves. And so while it's no surprise to have the support, it's very, very timely and well taken. And we look forward to moving on from there.
All right, thank you very much. And I forgot, Madam Permanent Secretary, to ask you to consider finally an area within your purview. Can you explore whether the spanking new building that the Ministry of Agriculture occupies on the highway, is there any possibility of room, space, accommodation being made available so that the cocoa company can be accommodated?
I can answer that.
I throw it out for you.
I can answer that immediately. There's no space.
Oh, there's no space.
I do not even have sufficient for my staff.
Oh, I see. Thank
So I
you.
can answer that.
Well, may I, on behalf of the entire committee, extend our appreciation and sincerest thanks to the officials from the Ministry of Finance Investments Division for being here with us. Also the Ministry of Agriculture, headed by the Permanent Secretary, and the Cocoa Company of Trinidad and Tobago, headed by its chairman. We'd also like to thank members of the public as well as members of the media for viewing and following these events as they unfold. We'd like to, at this time, adjourn this meeting and to once again thank everyone for being present. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.